and on online portals. Today, he continues his advocacy work on human rights on various crucial issues, nationally and internationally. He was very much involved in the campaign to prove the innocence of late Father Stan Swami, who was illegally incarcerated in October 2020. As part of a national initiative, he is currently involved in a campaign to defend democracy and for the revocation of the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, UAPA, and other draconian laws in the country. Beginning 27 February 2002, Gujarat was engulfed in what is commonly referred to as a Gujarat carnage. Father Prakash has been one of the voices that has championed the cause of the Muslims who were victims of the fundamentalist forces in this carnage. He has since been involved in a relentless campaign for the rights of the victim survivors, together with several other groups and networks, and particularly with the Citizens for the Justice and Peace, of which he is a board member. In 2002, he testified before the U.S. Commission for International Religious Freedom, USCIRF, in Washington on the reality of the Muslims of Gujarat. Father Prakash is a recipient of several national and international awards and honors. These include Mother Teresa International Award for Social Justice by Harmony Foundation in 2013, World's Top 10 Peacemakers in Action by Cannonball, the well-known US-based Center for Inter-Religious Understanding in 2010, the Legion of Honor by the President of the French Republic for lifetime commitment to the defense and the promotion of human rights in India in 2006, the Rafi Ahmed Kibai Award for Humanitarian Works by the Indian Muslim Council, USA in 2003, the Kabir Puraskar Award by the President of India for promotion of communal peace and harmony in 1995. In June 2002, he was given the Lifetime Achievement Award by the Delhi Minorities Commission. In a few days from now, on 1st December, the Indian Catholic Press Association will present him with their Excellence in Journalism Award at a function in Mumbai. All the best, Father, for your future endeavors. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Benita D'Souza. May I request Father Cedric Prakash to come forward so that we can felicitate you. I shall now invite Ms. Sonal Shah to welcome Father Cedric Prakash with a bouquet. Thank you, Ms. Sonal Shah. I now invite Mr. Vishnu Chauhan to honor Father with a shawl as a sign of our gratitude for having him here today. Thank you, Mr. Vishnu Chauhan. I shall now call upon Ms. Anita Fernandez to give the memento as a token of our appreciation. Thank you, Ms. Anita Fernandez. I invite Father Cedric Prakash to enlighten us on the National Education Policy 2020 and what would have been St. Ignatius Loyola's response to it.
Dear Father Xavier, Ms. Lakshmi Iyer, my dear sisters and brothers of this great institution, St. Xavier's High School, Loyola Hall. It's good to be here with you this morning. Thank you for the warm welcome, the floral, the shawl, the memento, and also the very elaborate introduction. I'm happy, and I want to thank Padam very specially for giving me the privilege, the joy of being with you this morning. Today's talk is in the context of this Ignatian year that we are going through, and this school has been organizing talks. And today, my talk is in a way three-dimensional. It's first of all about St. Ignatius of Loyola, the conversion, the Cannonball moment, and you'll have heard many. I've seen them on YouTube. I've been part of the live stream of each of the talks. The second is the national education policy. From last year, we had a new thing, and it's there now. People are talking about it, and I'm providing perhaps a certain insight. And the third is each one of you here is an educator, is a teacher, and a very, very privileged group in our country today. We have had the Gurukul system in India, and for time immemorial, the Guru, that's why we have the Guru Dakshina and so on, the teacher has been an important and indispensable part of the Indian ethos. And that is why I would say this is three-dimensional, because education comes from the Latin educare, to take care of. And the main symbol for education is always a tender sapling, a little plant that grows. And you, my dear sisters and brothers of St. Xavier's School, Loyola Hall, are called to play this important role, not merely in the school, not merely in the city of Ahmedabad or the state of Gujarat, but in fact, for children all over the country today. So the topic which I've been given is this National Education Policy 2020 and how St. Ignatius of Loyola, he is our founder of the Society of Jesus. Father Vipul is here, Father Xavier, myself, we are Jesuits. I'm not sure whether there is anybody else. But he founded the Society of Jesus. Next. We don't have the remote. Yeah. Okay. So this is the Ignatian year. And I think the Ignatian year is important for us to be able to understand what is happening in the world today. It's not merely a Catholic issue. It is not merely a particular issue of the Jesuits, of the Church, but it's all over. The next one. So this I've already said. This is a great institution, and congratulations to Father Amalraj, congratulations to each one of you, all the collaborators and so on, for organizing these series of talks, and this is the sixth. Next. Who was St. Ignatius of Loyola? And that is a question you have been thinking about. You have had many insightful and inspirational talks. I want to highlight certain dimensions of Ignatius of Loyola. Next. First of all, he was a man of faith and stood for justice. Right from the very beginning, he said, this is where I am and this is what I have to do. Okay, he was a visionary. He was able to see things far beyond his own times. He was a person with a tremendous amount of charisma. He understood what was happening in the world of his time, and he tried to give the world of his best. He was a person who was able to read and understand the signs of the times. That is important. Su tai che and kevi tai che, and maro jawab to so ho જોઈએ. So all the time he was wondering. He had the courage to respond to these. The signs of the time I can read, I can understand, but jawab apano to abo sehi baat nathi. This is not very easy, but he was there. He was a man on a mission, and that is what we see and we empathize with him all the time. He was full of fire and ready to set this world on fire. Next. He had a conversion experience, and the ones who have come earlier before me have spoken about this conversion experience, and we are observing the 500th anniversary of this conversion experience. And he felt the need after this conversion experience to have formal education. He was perhaps a little younger than me, but he was an old man. But he said, I need to go and study. So he began with the University of Barcelona, where he was there at that time. Then he went to 3 famous universities of the world of that time, of Alcalá, the one on the left, the central, the Salamanca. Do a Google on Salamanca. It was the university of the world at that time. And the symbol was an owl, a voice of wisdom. And finally he went to the University of Paris, where he took an Emmy at a very old age. And people were very much younger to him. One of the students at that time, the most popular perhaps in the University of Paris, was St. Francis Xavier, after whom the school is also named. Next. St. Ignatius realized that education is at that time the prerogative only of few. Only for these people. Those who wanted to become priests and those who were nobility of Loyola in Spain. And he could get it. It was not available to them. It was the monopoly of the monastery, the monks, the church, and the nobility. And that's what made him angry. He could not accept this. And together with the newly formed Society of Jesus, after he formed it, he began opening schools everywhere, and which were meant for everyone. That you have to realize, as teachers in this institution, St. Ignatius of Loyola felt that education should reach every single person, wherever they are, and so on. And next. So the Jesuits began the first public schools all over the world. If any of you go to Goa, you will see this kind of gate. And you'll wonder, are they so taiche? But it has not merely archaeological and heritage symbolism. It is the powerful symbol of how education came to India for the ordinary people. St. Paul's College in Goa, where first it was only people who were studying to become priests were admitted, but then slowly everybody from Goa was being admitted. It was the first public school here in India, St. Paul's in Goa. Next. Now the Jesuits, right at the beginning, were called the schoolmasters of Europe because they took education to everybody. And already in the 15th, 16th, late 15th century, the 16th, 17th, 18th century, any amount of schools had begun in Europe by the Jesuits, something like about 740 schools. And some of the top names today in education, whether it is calculus or mathematics or science or astronomy, belong to the Society of Jesus. You only have to do a Google to find out. A simple name there on the left-hand side. There is this guy called Christopher Clavius. Now of December, and to begin the new year. Now, Karikar, this is not a Christian New Year. It is what is called the Western New Year. And in fact, the New Year of the Church begins tomorrow, the first Sunday of Advent, and it goes according to the lunar cycle. It's towards the end of November, beginning of December. But this Christopher Clavius, a German mathematician, was called by the Pope at that time, Pope Gregory, because there's a lot of confusion about the calendar. And he contributed tremendously to what is known as the universal calendar today, beginning with January, February, and ending with the 31st of December. And the whole world will be celebrating. In India, we have many New Years. We have the Hindu New Year, we have the Muslim New Year, we have the Sindhi New Year, we have the Parsi New Year, we have the Chinese New Year, we have the Japanese. There are plenty of New Years in the world. But there is one New Year, which is the Western New Year, which is accepted by the commercial world, all over, from China right up to South America. And that was the contribution of a Jesuit, Christopher Clavius, which is today called also the Gregorian calendar. So the Jesuits contributed tremendously to the educational ethos of the country, of the world, right from the time St. Ignatius began the Society of Jesus. That is why today the Jesuits are known primarily for their educational work, and some of the topmost universities of the world are today run by Jesuits everywhere. Next. We have a great Jesuit, Father Pedro Arupe. He has been to this institution long ago, before I joined the Society of Jesus. But he was our superior general. He was from the Basque land, the same place where St. Ignatius of Loyola came from. And he was also there in Hiroshima, when Hiroshima was bombed in 1945. And he opened that whole, what we call the Jesuit novitiate, to those, who were battered and bruised because of the nuclear bomb. So in 1973, he went to Spain to speak to the International Congress of Jesuit Alumni. And he said, there on the right, first let me ask this question. Have we Jesuits educated you for justice? He asked the ex-students, there were thousands gathered there. You and I know that many of your Jesuit teachers will answer to that question. They will answer in all sincerity and humility, no, we have not. And Father Arupe gave Jesuit education these very powerful words. He says, Jesuit education, our prime initiative, our prime objective is to form men and women for others. And that was Father Pedro Arupe. He provided an insight later on in 1974-75, and we had a big meeting in Rome. He gave a very powerful mandate to the whole Society of Jesus, the faith justice mandate. Later on, we had Father Peter Hans Koldenbach, a Dutchman, who was his successor next. And Father Peter Hans Koldenbach, very strongly said, we aim to form leaders in service, men and women of competence, of conscience, and compassionate commitment. 3 C's, but he defines commitment with compassion. We need competence. We cannot say Atu Chale, because one favorite word we have in Gujarat and all over India, Chale say, Amasu. Okay? But he says, no, we need top people. That is why we use the word Majis, excellence. We need conscience. We cannot say, bas, 500 rupiya, 10 rupiya, 50,000 rupiya, suitcase aapu to chale, nahi chale. We must have the conscience. And finally, commitment. Not only commitment for one day, but what we call compassionate. Yesterday, on the 26th of November, in 2016, Father Koldenbach died. I was the first Jesuit in the world to be by literally when he died. We lived on the same floor in Beirut together, and for me, he inspired me tremendously, and I remember him very, very specially for his insight. He came in a tough time in the world and after Pedro Arupe, but he was able to steer the whole society of Jesus towards greater vision, towards greater commitment in the service of others. He says, if you see above, he said Jesuit schooling should be well-rounded, intellectually competent, open to growth, religious. એટલે આ ફક્ત ક્રિસ્તી ધર્મ વિશે તો વાત કરતા નથી, but religious you must પેલા આધ્યાત્મિકના અર્થમાં. It has to be a kind of a spirituality which should come from inside, okay, and committed to doing justice in generous service to the people of God. Next. Finally, 1986, I came here in 1987. Father Neres Coutinho was the principal here in this institution, and one of the first things that I was across the road and also sitting in the office, that Father Neres said, let's have something on what is called characteristics of Jesuit education. I'm not sure whether any of you, later on, some of the staff who were here when I was in my first stint here, are still here, I know. But we had a workshop in that old hall on the characteristics of Jesuit education. And Jesuit education has characteristics. And here there are some of them put, like the magis cura personalis means the personal attention given to each individual. You cannot neglect, cannot say that he or she is one of the crowd, but being there to form men and women for others. A unity of heart, mind and soul, these cannot be separated. Ad maiorem de gloriam, for the greater glory of God, which you find AMDG everywhere. Forming an education agents of change, social change, that ultimately our students should contribute for the good of society, for the good of the country, to find God in all things. It is the last exercise of our spiritual exercise. And then finally, as I said earlier, the magis, the excellent, to move, to go beyond the ordinary. And then we have, later on in 1993, the Jesuits came out with something very important next. It's called the Ignatian Pedagogical Paradigm. And it should be internalized actually by every single Jesuit educator. And this Ignatian Pedagogical Paradigm speaks about a kind of a movement which is rotational. It cannot begin with one and end with another, but it is all kind of unified. It is intertwined. One flows into the other. First, we always begin with the context, reality, vastavikta sulche, and so on. Then we go to the experience, the anubhav. How do I give sakshi, the witness, to what I'm studying in terms of the context? What about my reflection? Am I thinking about what is happening? I need action, very concrete action, and ultimately evaluation. So in every form, there put many more details. We go to the next one, which is a similar, next slide, a similar, what's called 5 educational principles. Context, understanding the student's life, the family he or she comes from, the reality he or she lives in, and so on. Going towards the experience, providing the intellectual and affective, the psychological, the emotive learning opportunities, reflection of meaning for self and others. How do I understand this? What is happening to me? Why are the poor becoming poorer and the rich becoming richer in India? What is the meaning of life? And that is some of the important questions. Finally, the next is the action. How do I take my study, my reflection into concrete action? Moving from attitude, does it bring about in me an attitudinal change? And do I go into concrete action? And finally, the evaluation. Evaluation is not only writing an examination. Now you'll have had the experience of a lot of the online examinations and all know how poorly the children have fared after writing these offline examination after more than 1.5 years. Online mat game de chale. But the students have lost the practice of writing. So one does not look only at the examination paper, one has to look what has happened to the student. Why is the student being like this? when the room has become dark and my connectivity barabar nathi side, and so I can do anything. So I'm, and then I'm constantly on my net looking at possibly anything at the World Wide Web. So it's not education that is taking place, but a kind of an escapism. And this, if you look at a recent UNICEF study, which I advise all of you to read, it has harmed the children all over the world, but particularly of India, for several reasons. Millions of children had no access to an appliance, to connectivity, which is a fact. A lot of children had the connectivity, had the appliance, but used it as a means for escapism. And the third is, in spite of having the appliance, many belong to the WhatsApp University and many other things, but in spite of having all that, the children had lost what we call the assimilation, the learning, and even the cognitive skills, even the ability to write. Yeah, it was lost even in good students. So this COVID-19, this pandemic, has harmed almost anybody and everybody. It was perhaps not in our hands, but it has affected the children, the minds and formation in a tremendous way, and has harmed several future generations. And now we need to think of what we need to do about it. So how do we do this evaluation? How do we bring about a change? Then we have some features of the Ignatian paradigm. Next. Okay? It applies to all curricula. You may say it is something spiritual, it is something psychological. No. It applies to maths, to science, to Sanskrit, to Gujarati, to Hindi, to English, to everything. It's fundamental in the teaching learning process. Why am I studying this? How am I studying it? How am I going to use it both in my career and for the good of the country? It promises to help teachers to be better teachers. The whole design of this Ignatian pedagogical paradigm is to help educators become better educators. It personalizes learning. That learning is not only a once and for all, but it's a very personal approach. We have made of our children robots, machines. You break the code, put some information, and in the examination, you try to vomit what you have learned. No, that's not education. And this is not what Jesuit education is all about. It stresses the social dimension of both learning and teaching. It has to be in situ, in context. How do we make our students better and more effective leaders for change, to contribute for the good of society, for the country, and for the good of all? Then we had next. So now I'm coming into the third dimension of today's presentation, Rashtriya Shiksha Niti 2020, the National Education Policy. It came. Okay. Now let's see. I need to make some statements right at the beginning. For me, I believe in education. I'm a Jesuit, and every single Jesuit believes in the worth and the value of education, of contributing to the good of every single student, every single citizen of this country, especially those entrusted in our care. Education is important. Education needs to be reformed, should be transformed all the time. And that is, we cannot live in the pre-British stage, the colonial stage of education. We have to change. We have to change with the time. We have to change with the context, and that is important. So, a national education policy is definitely needed, and that is important. And I stress over and over again, we need a national education policy. When I was towards my end of my schooling and beginning of my university, we had the Kothari Commission report. Please read it. Please visit it. It's huge. It's voluminous. Then in 1986, we already had an education policy, which was excellent. It was the same time we had this characteristics of Jesuit education. And after many years in 2020, we have a new policy, which is the NEP. It's not new education policy, but the national education policy, and now there are some revisions made and even some changes made. But let us say, when there is a policy that comes out by anyone, anywhere in the world, and especially where education is concerned, thanks to the mothers and fathers of our Constituent Assembly, and there was a great Jesuit there too, Father Jerome D'Souza, who became, he was from the place from where Father Ahmedabad comes from Tamil Nadu. He was a Jesuit belonging to that province, and he became India's representative at the United Nations. Pandit Nehru sent him there. He was a member of the Constituent Assembly, and we had great people, intellectuals, activists, people with a lot of vision thinking, and we have today one of the greatest constitutions in the world. And yesterday we celebrated that Constitution Day, in which the key elements of our democracy are justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity, and these are non-negotiable. So that is why I'm looking at the national education policy in the context of the Constitution. Good. Next. Yes, many leading thinkers, you'll need to do a Google and so on, intellectual academics. I've been in some fora nationally for the last year or so, from the time the national education policy was kind of, academics, some of the best brains of the country, civil society leaders of the country, have criticized the national education policy on several counts, including the infringement of the constitutional provisions which have been guaranteed. Any one of you have read this national education policy? Any one of you have studied it? So anyway, this is an embarrassing question, and till I was pushed into it, I really did not study it, but over these last many months, you can download a copy. I was wondering whether the government has printed copies, which should have been done, and sent to every school. Tran Bhasha, Gujarati, Hindi, and Angrezi should have come to the school. Whole printed copies with certain amendments should have come. Now, if you look at in Haryana already, there is a big problem regarding this. The government of Haryana, which is part of the national government, okay, has serious problems on. It's there. It's on YouTube. Everything. Now let us see. I'm going to give you. I've got maybe there are 100 reasons why the national education policy should not be accepted, and so on. Now, don't tell me there is a lot of good. Yes, there is a lot of good. I'm not saying there is no lot of good, but when you critique something, you have to look at the way it's going to affect the future of the country, the minds of every single student in the country. So I'm providing just now just 13 what we call constitutional reasons why it cannot be accepted. The first, next, is that education belongs to a concurrent list of the Indian Constitution. And there are three circles which are definitely by the national government, by the federal government. The other side is by the state government. The center in green is by the, very clearly, which the national government cannot decide it. It can be decided only in the context of constant sawal jawab, samvad, only with a little bit dialogue with the state government. Then the state government has to dialogue it with the state centers. So we have to be accepting it. A lot of the non-BJP states in the country, because there are lots of imposition, and it denies the role and responsibility of the state government, and that goes against the constitutional provision which is there in the concurrent list. Next, education. What is education? Education is about equal opportunities for all, and we have in the constitution the fundamental right to equality. Koi unch nathi, koi neech nathi. And Nai Talim, J. Mahatma Gandhi was very clearly for the benefit, for the good of every single citizen of the country. Mahatma Gandhi gave us a talisman. when you want to do something or change something, take that to the poorest of the poor. See how it will affect his or her life, and then begin that change, that reform. So the right to, it violates the fundamental right to equality and obligation of the state by making, there are substandard educational provisions, such as we have to have school complexes, single teacher schools which are very dangerous. So the same teacher is going to teach from KG to 10th standard. I'll come to it later again. Home-based education. We have seen what has happened during the pandemic. A one-way digital education to the e-Vidya program. So one-way digital, so it's only teaching. There is no interaction. We are not looking at the students. There is no eye-to-eye contact. There is no emotional feeling which is necessary for the growth, for the nurturing of the student. This is important. And for 85 to 90% of the people, of our children is going to have a tremendously negative impact. વિદ્યાર્થી ફક્ત પેલા શહેરી વિદ્યાર્થીઓ નથી, ફક્ત જેને પાસે પૈસા છે આ વિદ્યાર્થીઓ, ફક્ત આ વિદ્યાર્થીઓ નથી. This will be very, very clear that the vast majority of our people live in rural areas, are poor, are marginalized. Next, the third one. The national education policy makes no reservation of the constitutional provision of reservation. Now, this is not for us to debate. There is a constitutional provision for reservation for the scheduled castes, for the scheduled tribes, for the other backward communities, and for people with disabilities. So we can get into debate. There's been a lot of stir even in Gujarat and so on, but just now that is irrelevant. Just now, it is the duty of the central and state government, since it's constitutionally binding, to make provision for it. Whether it is right or wrong, that is irrelevant. And the national government cannot unilaterally do away with it. Next, number 4. It deliberately excludes the words secularism and socialism. These are two fundamental. There's a lot of debate whether it was in the original Prastavna, preamble or not. Okay? But this is the legacy of the freedom struggle. And there we have in Delhi, this beautiful, with Mahatma Gandhi leading it. And we know what happened, how he went to protest. Aya Dandi Kusti from the Dandi Bridge. He walked right just to put the salt back into the sea, saying it was civil disobedience. A classic example which we need to emulate, to follow. That if you're going to educate people, if you're going to bring learning to the children, we need to impact on words like secular, and he sang one of the most famous songs he began here, he got it translated was a great Christian called John Henry Newman, who went from the Church of England, Christianity, to the Catholic. He became lead kindly light amidst the encircling gloom. And every single day in Gandhi Ashram they sing Premal Jyoti Da Kavi. And our main house here is named from Newman Hall to Premal Jyoti because this search for truth, the search to be a more secular society, and that is why here he sang and his compatriots belong to every religion. So I think it's important for us to understand why secular and why socialism is necessary to be there in a national education policy. Next, one of the important things that the Constitution mentions is a constitutional mandate. It's free and compulsory education. Nowhere in this national education policy it is mentioned. It's meant to be free. So, the argument in a school like this, we can have all our children can afford. Yes and no. It's not only about our school. It's about education. And we Jesuits, most of us, schools in Gujarat, are in the remote areas, for the poor and the marginalized. Father Amal Raj was teaching for many years in one of these schools in Jamkwao, and catering to those who have no access to education. Free and compulsory education is mandated by the Constitution, and no national education policy can do without it. Next, the national education policy will push 85 to 90% of our children and youth back to what we call caste-based occupations, to child labor. And this is a serious concern. We cannot afford this to happen. We have to work towards a more egalitarian society and say the right of children in Europe and America. People are not going, maybe in some other poorer countries, they are doing it. But child labor is strictly forbidden. Here you go a little outside, just now you are in the city. There are so many children without access to education. And this national education policy is going to force many of them. Next, you all will be smiling at me. Commercialization of education. After education, we know, becoming a business. And we say, everyone, if you do not know what to do, you start a school or start you can challenge me later, and I'm ready to sit with you. And I am concerned the way education has been commercialized, and that is a lot of things in this new national education policy. It promotes self-financing courses, the slashing of grants, and increasingly replacing scholarship with student loans. Now it's loans. So the arguments are very, very, what you call, tendentious. To say a student will be responsible, help another, but that is all backward. Okay? So you make a loan, and the amount of farmers who have committed suicides because they have not been able to pay back their loans. Students are committing suicide today too. Next. Online courses is going to be introduced very easily. To say now we live in a digital world, no. In some of the countries highly digitalized like Japan, okay, they have physical classes, they have face-to-face learning. We run a big university there, the Sophia University, and so on. And it won't be available, this digital learning, to a vast majority of our students. Next, number 9, large-scale recruitment of volunteers. અત્યારે તમારા B.Ed અને JPED કે MID જરૂર નથી. ચાલશે. You are going to have volunteers. You can get volunteers from everywhere. And our concern is, so we don't need now teachers. We can pay SIACs, assistant volunteers, pay them whatever we can, and then, so this is very dangerous. Then, number 10, this 3-language formula. There is, all are being used as synonyms. Regional language, mother tongue, and so on. So it is very dangerous. Is it the regional language? Is it the mother tongue? So suppose somebody comes here with, say, Tamil, and because the child and the parent is transferred, does the child have to learn only Gujarati? It's good to learn Gujarati, good to learn Hindi, but the imposition of languages is a very sensitive issue. Then the small children, so next, is no longer going to be with his or parents. So, right, it's a big market, send children out of the home. Now all have 1 children, 2 children, and so on. The family all are working. So come, we'll send the children at 3 years to school. It is now tapping a large untapped market of the pre-primary school. And normally, best psychologists will tell you the child till the age of 5 years should be with the parents, should be at home. And that is where the child is nurtured. Number 12, there is this whole approach, output measurement approach, instead of the input based. What is the child internalizing? What is the child learning? And then one teacher in this whole question of this Ekal Vidyas, single teacher schools, so commit a child. So this is being allowed. And 13, which is the last, okay, the privatization of schools. So you become a private school, charge whatever fees you want, and vast sections of our people, our children, will be kept educated and illiterate. Next, having glimpsed into these serious lacunae in the national education policy, would St. Ignatius of Loyola have accepted it? No, he would not. During his time, despite all odds, he always fought valiantly. First, he fought for the materiality. He says, I need power, I need prestige, I need position, I need possession, I need pride. But after his conversion, the Cannonball movement is very important. He said he fought for all that was wrong and evil, all which excluded and exploited, which marginalized and relegated. Next, he used three very clear what we call Ignatian methodology. He used the Ignatian discernment, he used the indifference, and the marches. It's basically Ignatian discernment to see asatoma sadgamaya. Okay, from darkness lead me to light, from death lead me from immortality. We are saying this prayer all the time. Okay, lead me to the truth. And even Mahatma Gandhi spoke about Satya Graha. So that is important. Then the indifference, to say that to let go. I need to let go of certain things, of things which I think are wrong, in order to find what is good. And marches is always to strive towards excellence, to go beyond the ordinary. Next, he would have realized that in keeping with what is happening to India today, the national education policy would be detrimental to the future of the children of our country. It would lead to vast sections of our country kept at the level of being uneducated and perhaps illiterate. A few monopolizing education in the control of the elite, the urban people, the super rich, the corporate sector. The gap between the have and have-nots would have increased. And the entire policy, it is sugar-coated, nice words are there. And everyone can say, Father, I am but read between the lines. Unable to respond to the context and the change. And the context is there in the, we have unemployment, we have hunger. Look at the world indicators of India. We are following on every single parameter. And that is the sad reality of our country. We have discrimination, everything. We hear about it all the time. Read the papers. And the art of the Deshnavasvikta change. How does education become the key to change? Next. As Jesuit educators, we are all called to study in depth this national education policy. Don't accept all that I have been saying. We need to critique it. See how is it going to help the country in 2050, okay? And critique it in the line of the Ignatian pedagogical paradigm. We have the characteristics of Jesuit education. You are Jesuit educators. And that is if we have the courage to do so. And if we do it, all of us, my dear sisters and brothers, would have gone through what I call the Cannonball moment, a conversion experience in this Ignatian year. And finally, the Jesuit motto is AMDG ad maiorium de gloriam. It doesn't matter whom we worship. Ishwar Allah Tera Naam Sabko Sanmati De Bhagwan. Okay? Doesn't matter, even if they are unbelievers, but ultimately we have to do things. Our life is meant for the common good and for the greater good. Thank you very much. God bless each one of you.
Education is the most powerful weapon we can use to change the world. That being said, truly, education reform has had its main purpose to make sure that the education delivered is of quality. Thank you, Father, for your words that have definitely enlightened us all. I now call upon Ms. Namrata Makwan to deliver the vote of thanks.
माननीय रेवरेंड फादर अमरराज, रेवरेंड फादर विपुल, हेडमिस्ट्रेस लक्ष्मी मैम, આજના અતિથિ વિશેષ ફાધર સેડ્રિક પ્રકાશ તથા મારા વાલા શિક્ષક મિત્રો, આપ સર્વને સુપ્રભાત. હું નમ્રતા મેકવાન, લોયલા પરિવાર વતી ફાધર સેડ્રિક પ્રકાશનો આભાર વ્યક્ત કરું છું કે તેઓ પોતાનો અમૂલ્ય સમય ફાળવીને આજના આ સેમિનારમાં આવીને આપણને સેન્ટ ઇગ્નેશિયસ કે જેઓ સામાન્ય માનવીને પણ બીજા લોકોની માફક શિક્ષણ મેળવવાનો હક અને અન્ય જેસુઇટ ફાધરો કે જેમણે સર્વધર્મ માટે શિક્ષણનો પ્રચાર કર્યો તે વિશે વિસ્તૃત સમજ આપી તેમજ રાષ્ટ્રીય શિક્ષણ નીતિ 2020 તથા શિક્ષણને લગતા તમામ પાસાઓ વિશે આપણને વિસ્તૃત સમજ અને જ્ઞાન સુંદર રીતે આપણી સમક્ષ રજૂ કર્યું તે બદલ ફાધર તમારો હૃદયના ઊંડાણપૂર્વક આભાર માનું છું. સાથે સાથે આજના સેમિનારને સફળ બનાવનાર અને પોતાનો સહયોગ આપનાર મારા શિક્ષક મિત્રો જેમાં એન્કરિંગ કરનાર લેડિસા મેમ, બેનિટા મેમ કે જેમણે ફાધરનો સુંદર પરિચય આપણી સાથે રજૂ કર્યો. આ સેમિનારની સર્વ વ્યવસ્થા સંભાળનાર વિનોદ સર અને જયેશ સર, સાઉન્ડ સિસ્ટમ સંભાળનાર ધ્વનિલ સર અને દશરથભાઈ, ફોટોગ્રાફી માટે કાજલ મેમ, વિડીયોગ્રાફી માટે જાની સર અને રવિરાજ સર તેમજ નોન ટીચિંગ સ્ટાફ અને સૌથી વિશેષ અહીં બિરાજેલ તમામ શ્રોતાગણનો હું દિલથી આભાર વ્યક્ત કરું છું. અને છેલ્લે ઈશ્વર પિતાનો આભાર કે જેમણે આપણને સર્વને સારી તંદુરસ્તી બક્ષી જેથી આપણે સૌ અહીં ઉપસ્થિત રહી શક્યા. આભાર.
Thank you, Ms. Amrita Mekwan. We now end the event with the National Anthem. I request everyone to please rise up.
जनगण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड उत्कल बंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलधि तरंगा तब शुभ नामे जागे तब शुभ आशीष मागे गाहे तब जय गाथा जनगण मंगलदायक जय हे